we really want this to be really focused kind of on, y'all as developers and how to actually use feature flags, how you can get started quickly, what it's going to do for you as a developer. So I don't want to burn up too much time on slides, but I think it's helpful just to provide a little bit of initial context before we let Cassie, who is the actual star here, take over and run the rest of the show. So at Harness, we talk about smart feature flags, and I want to qualify what that means in just a few minutes. But just real quick, running through the agenda, who's Harness, what are feature flags, how do they help you, and then we'll get over to the demo. So if you don't know what Harness is, you probably do if you're on this webinar, but we're a software delivery platform. We've got a whole bunch of different modules that share a common platform for doing everything from commit to monitoring to even cloud cost monitoring, testing in production with chaos. Anything you want to do as part of the software delivery process, all governed and automated together. And then as Matt alluded to, we all here are part of the feature flag team. And so feature flags at Harness, we consider it part of the DevOps automation quadrant, meaning it's part of the commit, deploy, and release cycle. And the reason for that is because we think if you really want to get to CI/CD maturity or trunk-based development maturity or DORA maturity, whatever terminology used from the industry, feature flags is kind of the big unlock for doing that. And the reason for that is feature flags themselves are just very simple, right? If you've ever used something called like an application config or a database toggle or a database switch, it's really just an if statement in your code that some backend somewhere, a database value, or even just your code itself says, hey, sometimes serve this code path, sometimes serve this code path, maybe for some users, maybe based on some conditions. So that part of it is, I think, pretty well understood. It's been around for a while and it's pretty simple. It's a lot of value on its own, but where it really provides value is when you think about it as an extension of that CI/CD process. And that's because if we look at what CD gets you, it's a huge step forward over not having CD. But every time you want to deploy, you've still got to be cherry picking what goes into that deploy. You've got to have folks on standby because the second that deploy goes out, every single change in that deploy is live to your end customers. You've got long living branches if some of the stuff couldn't make it into the deploy. If anything's wrong in the deploy, you have to roll back the whole thing, which means the good changes go away too. Or you have to just leave the errors in production while you do a fix forward more commonly these days. So even though CD is a step up, there's still all these other things as part of getting the software live that your developers have to do every day. You add in feature flags, and we call that complete continuous delivery because you don't have to do most of those things anymore. Put every change you're making behind a feature flag, it's flagged off, merge into your main branch constantly. It doesn't matter what goes out into production because everything you don't want live is flagged off. Incomplete features flagged off, stuff you're not ready to launch yet flagged off. You can just keep merging, keep shipping all the time into production. And all of that coordination time, all of that cherry picking, merge complexity, all of that goes away. Developers just go back to work at their keyboards. And if you have an issue in production, instead of a rollback or scrambling to fix forward, just go turn that one flag off. Now the thing causing problems is gone. Everything good is still there. You don't need a big fire drill. It's a much more stable way of working. So there's a lot of good metrics that have been quantified across the industry here, but the real summary is the stuff you want to see go up goes up when you use feature flags, and the stuff you want to see goes down goes down. So faster mean time to recovery, fewer errors in production, and big boost to productivity and deployment frequency. And actually, if you really look at this, I like to kind of tease it out, is it's actually a really hard thing to do. 3 times more deployments, but 40 fewer bugs in production, right? That can almost seem like a contradicting narrative, but exactly that control of separating release from deploy is how you can get faster, but also more stable at the same time. So we got one customer here that, just to shout them out, they talk about shortening their commit to production times by 3x, and that's a pretty common range we see through all of our customers. Now at Harness, though, we don't just talk about feature flags, we talk about smart feature flags. And that's because we're very interested beyond the simple turning on, turning off that you can do with a feature toggle. What else can you do with feature flags? How do you really make it a high impact thing for the whole business? And so we've got a few things. Some of them you'll see in the demo, not all of them, to be upfront with you, because this is really developer focused. So we don't want to take all the time for features that may not be for the developer user, but we'll talk about them a little bit here. So GitOps, right? Harness was the first and only vendor on the market doing GitOps for feature flags. That means you can store your entire flag configuration in a YAML file in a Git repo. You can still change it through the UI for less technical users. If you're a developer, you could just update that YAML file. It also just means you have the great audit history, traceability, all the benefits that come from a config as code way of working, but now brought over to feature flags for the first time. We've also got pipelines, and pipelines for feature flags can be a little non-intuitive, right? Because people think of CI or CD pipelines. But what we're talking about here is the ability to model your release process and reuse it as a best practice over and over. So turn it on for 10% of your users, monitor for 24 hours, have a manager approve, turn it on for 20% of your beta users, that kind of process. So you don't have to remember every day at 8 a.m. to get someone at the computer to do the next step. Build that ideal process once, run it as a pipeline with feature flags over and over. And that includes things like notifications, custom triggering, scheduling, send notifications to Slack, to Teams, whatever you want. So you can really model what good looks like for your organization as a business process. We've also got 24/7 service monitoring. So in Harness, you can monitor up any of your production services, tell us what you're listening for and what to look for. And then we can let you know, hey, it looks like this flag change is causing a problem in this service. We can do that correlation. And that way, if you're getting a service issue, you don't have to do that kind of open-ended spelunking of narrowing down what might have changed in the last day. We can just tell you, hey, the most recent event before this service issue was this feature flag change. And this helps remediation and helps save your team's time searching through piles and piles of logs. That's just some of what we mean by smart feature flags, right? We're talking about feature flags that have governance, velocity, control, automation, that are really about the business process of releasing your software in a controlled, safe, and monitored way. Now, just to give one quick example of how good can look with feature flags, you as a developer write your code, you ship that into the main branch, that goes off to the release team maybe you don't have a release team, which is great. That goes into production. You as a developer don't have to do anything else. The flags are off. Once it's out in production, maybe you go turn on some of those flags as an engineer, or maybe the product managers or account teams go and turn on those flags for individual customers. And you can already be well on to the next set of changes you want to work on. You don't have to sit there and babysit those changes all the way as they go live. You can just hand that control off and move on with your day. So these are common use cases people come to us with, but you can also flip this around. And what I would say is if you start using feature flags in production, you're actually going to see you end up doing almost all of these things. So kill switches, turn something off instantly, target specific users or provide entitlements to specific users, test changes in production, fast incident response, trunk-based development. Cloud migrations, this is a really big one, right? It's really easy to swap out services behind the scenes if you can flag those changes on or off, because you don't have to do the complexity of coordinated time-bound deployments to make those cutovers. Separating release from deploy, giving more control to product managers. All this kind of stuff just naturally starts to happen as your team goes from the very first time you ever implement a flag to 3 months, 6 months, 9 months later, everyone is just used to working with flags by default. One other shout I want to give before we switch gears to the demo here is feature flags, as you'll see, work by putting an SDK in your application. That SDK talks to Harness or to the relay proxy. And we really know this is a really high position of trust you put in Harness, right? You're putting our SDK in your software. You're counting on our SDK to serve the right values to your end user. And we know what that means, right? We know how important that is. So from the start, every decision at Harness has made to be sure that we are never an uptime dependency for your application. We are never a performance impact on your application. Everything is open source, the relay proxy, the XDKs. There is no black box that you can't figure out what's happening. There's full API access, data in, data out to everything. And we architect everything for instant horizontal scalability. So we're never at risk of performance impact for your downstream customers. Any of these things we can definitely dig into more in like follow-up sessions. And I should say one of the things we want to hear from y'all is if anything is interesting today, we want to talk to you more and maybe do a custom session for your teams, for your customers, so we can follow up with a very personalized version of what does feature flags look like for you. But just to wrap up on this slide, we just want to really drive home architecture, performance, scalability. These are things you care about when we talk about feature flags, and we care about them as well. So all that being said, I will stop here. I'll pass it over to Cassie so we can get to the fun, cool demo parts of the presentation, and then we'll take some questions at the end and along the way.
All right. Thank you, Ethan. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen here. And let me know what you guys are seeing. Do you see my full desktop? VS Code on the left, harness feature flags on the right. Okay.
Looks good.
Perfect. It's always scary when we're going through sharing a full desktop. So hi everyone, Cassie Souza here, solutions engineer from the harness front, and I'm going to be walking you through just a quick demo on harness feature flags and how to get set up. So basically what we're going to be starting off with today is this simple Google React t-shirt store application. On the left-hand side is the actual piece of code, code snippet that we're going to be modifying to be able to apply the changes from harness feature flags and see exactly what benefits those can give us. And then here is the actual app that's just running locally on my machine here at localhost 3000. What I'm going to be following through is actually this, this tutorial here hosted on the Harness Developer Hub. I'll go ahead and share this in the Zoom chat. What you can do is follow along if you like, or just use it as a reference after this webinar that you can follow along and get set up on your own as well. So let me go over to the harness front, and sorry for the back and forth. I'm just going to pull up the VS Code here on the left-hand side. So just a quick shout out, this is harness. For those who have not seen it before, we're going to be focusing on feature flags today. I am going to walk us through this getting started flow. So this is basically going to be your quick entry point into feature flags. What we're going to do is set up a flag, set up an environment, an SDK key for that environment, and then we're going to go automatically into flipping feature flags within our application. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. So first things first, I'm actually going to go through and create a flag. I'm going to name this flag, let's call it navbar. The goal for me here within this React application on the left-hand side is actually, let me show it to you really quickly, is actually going to be to shift the shop icon or the shop text from the center to the left-hand side with the simplicity of just turning on and off a feature flag. So I'm going to go ahead and create that first flag. Let's go to the next screen here. So this is going to be where we actually set up our environment as well as our SDK keys. So quick shout out to the different languages that we support for our feature flagging capability. What we'll do is actually for your integration point or your entry point within the code, you're going to integrate our SDK key or your SDK within your application to something like a .NET app, Android, Flutter, iOS, Java, JavaScript, all of the things. Today, we're actually going to be leveraging our JavaScript SDK. And I'm going to type in or create a new environment here, create an environment. And from there, what we can do here is actually specify what type of environment this is. Is it a non-production or production type of environment? So this is going to be useful later on down the line when we are actually setting controls around who can toggle flags in what environment and be able to manage the environment specifics in that sense. I will point out that we will be, from an integration standpoint, each environment has a specific SDK key for that environment. So we have our dev in our environment. I guess in more real life scenarios, we would have maybe a dev environment, a QA, a staging, as well as a production environment. So just depending on the workflow or the space that we're working in, we're going to have a different SDK key for each environment that we're in. Okay, let's go ahead and create that. This is actually going to create that environment. Let me create this SDK key really quick. We'll just call it Devinar. And I will point out that we do have the languages and SDKs that we do support are separated between client side as well as server side SDKs. So JavaScript would be more on the client side front, and then maybe something like a Node or just pure Java would be on server side. All right, so we generated our SDK key for our Devinar environment. And what I'm actually going to do is copy that SDK key and import it into my application. Let me pull up VS Code here. So just to kind of walk you guys through what's happening is we're going to make the majority of our changes here within this use effect function. First thing that we're going to do is initialize our SDK and authenticate into it. So that's my new generated SDK key for my Devinar environment. The other things that we're doing here are specifying things like targets, what attributes are associated to those targets, and then any sort of additional configuration in regards to like where we're capturing events from, what our base URL is, what our debugging levels are, and things like that. From there, we are just kind of depending on the event or action that is coming from the feature flags server. So on instantiation of this application, what are we going to do? We're going to console log or just print out the states of all of the flags that we're detecting within my environment. And then we're also identifying if any flag changes were to be made from the harness front, what actions are we going to take based off of that state? And then I guess we'll get down into the weeds here in a little bit. But you'll see from everything else that's contained on this page is we just imported the SDK key, right? So if I'm starting net new, if I didn't have an application that was already running that I already wanted to work out of, this getting started page is actually going to walk you through all of the steps that you'll need to do to get started with just a simple JavaScript application. So how do you install the JavaScript SDK? Either using NPM or Yarn. And then this is a pure just HTML snippet that you can use just to run locally on your machine. All right, from there, last stage of this getting started page is actually going to validate that we do have connection with our application as well as the feature flags. So what I'm going to do here is I toggled on this navbar flag, and let's get back to the code here really quickly. What I actually want to do is change the div of that React application. I want to be able to change it dynamically so that this class name, whatever this variable is that I'm looking for, that I'm trying to set, it's actually going to be looking to check the value of that feature flag that I'm identifying here. If it is true, then if it is true or the flag is enabled, then I'm actually going to change that navbar, change the text on that navbar to the left-hand side. Otherwise, it's going to remain in the middle. The identifier of the flag that we just created here is actually nav_bar, as you see. If you can see that, I can barely see that. Nav_bar here on the harness front. So let me change this so that we're actually looking at the proper feature flag within my environment. All right. Moving back to the harness side, it looks like we did actually receive some events from our connection. So that's amazing. Let's go ahead and complete this flow. All right. So if you guys see now, the nav bar is now blue. And shop is now, the text has been transitioned over onto the left-hand side. This is where, the magic will happen. So let me go ahead and disable this flag. you see dynamically or almost instantaneous that I disabled the flag, which means I'm going back to original state or default state of my application, where the flag has now been evaluated to false, and shop is now back in the middle of the nav bar. From here, what we can actually do is get a little bit specific in what actions we want to take within once I actually do go ahead and enable or disable or change the state of a feature flag. So here on the right-hand side, we're going to be focusing primarily on the harness front and kind of how we can spice this up here for the next couple of minutes. So this is going to be your configuration state in a sense. So if we're talking maybe product or any sort of customer facing role that needs to go in and toggle flags for a certain environment or for a certain geographical region, this is an option or kind of where you could go to be able to do that, where we do have our kill switch and you can turn this flag on and off now. What I did want to highlight here is the concept of a feature flag pipeline, and I'm going to expand this so that we can see this fully. So it's what we call a feature flag pipeline, and Ethan did describe this a bit during his slide presentation. So what we're going to do with feature flag pipelines is you're now able to create more of a process around the change of state of a feature flag. So for example, if and when I toggle on a feature flag in a production environment or just toggle on a feature flag in general, and I wanted to be able to track the state of that flag and track the changes that were made to that flag because it is hitting a customer-facing environment. Now what I can do is create a feature flag pipeline, update a Jira ticket or update a change management ticket to identify that process. And then from there, based off of approval or based off of status, then I actually get that final say to turn on that feature flag within that environment. All right, so let me actually show you how to do that really quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and create a flag pipeline. This is going to take us to our pipeline studio within Harness. So a little bit of a sneak peek within Harness pipelines over here. Just going to call everything Devinar today. What I'm going to do is select a feature flag stage, and I'm going to call this, let's say, prod rollout. And what I'm going to do is actually add a step here. And what this is going to do is, remember, we're creating a process. When I do go ahead and enable a flag, what actions do I want to take? So within this example, I'm actually going to request that I do have someone manually approve that this flag should be turned on within this environment. And by that someone, I'm going to say myself in this example. So let's say prod approval. And let me add a user group here and apply changes. So from there, if I do get the go ahead, I'm actually going to now turn on that flag, enable flag within my Devinar environment. What I'm going to do here is actually set the flag that I'm going to be toggling to runtime input. This allows us to have more of a dynamic approach to the flag that we want toggled throughout this pipeline. I'm going to apply changes here and save this. Let me go back to feature flags really quickly. Let's go back to that navbar flag, back to flag pipelines. Going to add a flag pipeline here. Now we see that Devinar pipeline that we just created. And I'm going to select that as my desired flag pipeline anytime I change the state of this feature flag. So now you see the Devinar pipeline showing up here. What I'm actually going to do is toggle off this flag and save. Let's go back to flag pipeline. And now you see that this pipeline was actually triggered. We can go ahead and expand the trigger details, but let me go in and actually open up this pipeline execution So now we're able to see that our pipeline has automatically been kicked off based off of the change of state of this feature flag. And what it's asking from me is to approve this change within my environment. So do I actually want to, I think the roles are a bit reversed, but do I actually want to disable this flag within my production environment? I have a certain user group that is set to actually give the go-ahead, to actually give the thumbs up. Right now it's me, but this could be any sort of PM or whoever gives that final say within your prod environment. Maybe it's QA or whoever it might be. Say, yes, this looks good. Let's disable. So this is using our harness native approval step. What this is actually going to be able to do is now disable that flag within my dev&R environment. And this can go either way as well. If I were to enable the flag within the environment and I did need an approval step for that, it would go vice versa. So let's actually validate. When we go to feature flags here, what we should see is that the nav bar feature flag is now disabled within my dev&R environment. So just to kind of showcase that we can operationalize the feature flag toggling within your app or within your business unit. Instead of, if we didn't have feature flags, then, if we didn't have the feature flag pipelines, then it would kind of just be, yes, we're leveraging the audit trails, yes, we're leveraging the activity, but now we can create a process and operationalize this. All right. Carrying on with the sort of pipeline and a little bit of governance and policies around what we can do with feature flags, we do have a concept of governance around feature flags itself. So what we have built on top of is Open Policy Agent, which is an open source policy engine. Oh, let me go ahead. Is an open source policy engine out there in the web. And we have built on top of it. So now you can actually apply policies and apply rules around things like feature flagging naming conventions or certain states of flags within different environments. So let me go ahead and build a sample policy just to give you an idea of what we can do here. So something like naming convention and best practices within your organization is just more for cleanliness and more for readability, also for maybe new hires that are coming into the picture. We can leverage naming conventions to enforce that, hey, okay, so any feature flag, any net new feature flag that we're creating has to follow this specific format so that we actually know, okay, this flag is tied to X, Y, and Z JIRA ticket in X, Y, and Z project. So we have that end-to-end visual and we have the end-to-end picture. You can also do something like enforce environment states of a flag so that, say, for example, I wanted to go in and toggle on a flag within my production environment. If that flag is not turned on within any or all of my lower environments, like a QA or a staging environment, then I will actually prohibit that flag from being turned on. Reason being is because if that flag was actually not toggled on within my lower environments, and I'm trying to enable it within my production environment, that could tell me that this flag was actually not tested and this was an accidental toggle of this flag. So as you can see, there's kind of two different approaches in how we can enforce states and just reliability of the flag toggling within your environment, within your application. So we do have OPA, we do have policies that you can create restrictions around, but then there's also the feature flag pipelines to kind of operationalize all of this as well. And you'll see here on the right-hand side, I did toggle on this visual versus rego option. OPA is the language of choice for Open Policy Agent, is actually rego. For those who are familiar, you may have banged your head against the wall trying to understand or write new rego policies. What we have done for you is actually kind of giving you the library to get started with that. And then we can also use ChatGPT to create some new Rego policies for us. If we actually step through, we have different options to actually test this policy against already existing flag configurations that we would have as well. All right. And then lastly here, what I did want to highlight is that within feature flags, we have of course, the toggle on or off of that feature to our customer-facing application or to a desired environment. We are also able to intelligently kind of target certain flag states for different groups of users. So what we call those within the harness world are targets. A target can be any any item or end user or account or geographical region or device type that you actually want to control different states of features for. In this example, we have a webinar user that I'm actually targeting. From there, what I can do with that user is we're sending in a dynamic list of attributes that you choose that are relevant to you. This could be subscription type. This could be geographical location. It could be device type again. What you can do with that is now actually create target groups. So grouping that subset of users, if we're talking geographical location, to all of my North American users, let's create a target group for them. And then what I can do with that is now set certain feature flag states that I want to toggle on for all of those users at once. So there's different ways that you can kind of play around with the targeting, even in regards to internal testing for my QA team. If I have my QA environment and I want to, or a specific dev environment or whatever it might be, if I want to toggle on the specific flag within that environment to that of which I only have my QA testers seeing those features, then I would be able to create a target group based off of certain attributes that we're sending in. All right. I think for me, that was pretty much everything that I wanted to cover with you all today. So just to do a bit of review, what we did was we leveraged this amazing, simple React Store application. And what we did with that was based off of the different states of a feature flag that we're toggling on and off, we were able to switch the text of the shop text within the nav bar from left to right. We talked a little bit through feature flag pipelines, how we can operationalize feature flags, how we can set guardrails within feature flags with Open Policy Agent, and then also talked a bit about targeting and how we can control the rollout of certain features to different end users.